to you today about. And we come from a change management background, so for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's talking about transition. It talks about how people and customers adopt solutions and how difficult it's becoming. And the more I'm seeing it, the more it's becoming more apparent to me that the opportunity of choice is becoming very, very convoluted for employees, customers, merchants. There's lots of different ways that we can handle it, but what's actually happening, the more I've been seeing the trend, is that it's becoming too much choice. And that is what I'm calling the innovation paradox. And when we go through the different use cases and examples I'm going to show you today, hopefully it will resonate with you, and you can take that away from your side as well to think about the end person, the customer at the end of the day, the employee that needs to take that on, and also the complexity that is in the regulatory space. So I'm going to go through a few sort of slides for you. The first is obviously very, very simple. The payment infrastructure game has changed enormously over the past few years. We've seen a lot of real-time services coming in. We have batch processes that are really, really complex to now unbundle. A lot of regulation, which is also causing a bit of an issue in terms of the regulator also wanting to innovate. And that in itself causes a lot of problems, especially in the banking environments. And here we are talking about FinTech specifically, but you're also not, you're not outside of that regulation. It will still impact you regardless. So what we're going to talk about today, there was a very funny comment earlier about interoperability, but it is the new word. It is the new paradigm. It is the way that everything is working now. The customer wants to be able to operate within their different account structures, their different cards, their different FinTech operations, their different bank accounts, be able to do it simultaneously and without any friction. And that is quite a challenge, because is everybody ready for that? And are people truly on the same page? And where it becomes quite complex is that customers themselves have got too much choice. And what's happened now with the new regulations that are coming in, we've seen it in Namibia, we've seen it in South Africa, we've seen it in Zambia, we've seen it in Nigeria. What happens with the interoperability is it actually creates a lot of confusion, because what does the customer tend to do? They have a digital wallet, they have a bank account, they have a credit card, they can do anything that they want to. But when open banking comes into the whole environment, it makes it quite complex for an individual to understand that. And what I'm trying to explain today is really what innovation means. The more we innovate, are we not creating too much confusion for the customer, too much operational issues and backgrounds that people are not necessarily involved in? So where we see a bit like a big problem in the change management landscape certainly is sort of the people who are not on a smartphone, that they don't actually know how to do that, but they still want to keep their money in their pockets. They don't want to use digital services. And ultimately that comes down to trust. Now, the previous speaker before me, just to your point, is talking to digital trust, but also consumer trust. And how do we influence that is really what I'm here to talk to you today about. So when we look at these different things, do people truly understand? The research is showing us how big the payment environment is becoming. The question is, how distributed is that payment environment? And how much choice do people have? And are we leading them towards the right options for their own financial future? And are we leading them in a way that the market itself might be becoming a bit smaller because of all of these different choices? Are we all fighting the same battle? Are we all competing for the same customer? Or is there a new customer? And I think that is really where this whole conversation around the innovation paradox comes in. The more that we want to add to the environment, the more it becomes more competitive, the more difficult it becomes for the consumer to make a choice, and ultimately they tend to move back to what they know. And they go back to trusted things. And this is really, from a FinTech perspective, where our challenge of thoughts today is really going and saying, is the new technology not too overwhelming? And I think that that is really where we have seen what has happened in the market. So again, I'll go back to my experience and talk to you about the different landscapes I've worked in. And ultimately, we're dealing with, when we did PayShop, we implemented that with PayInc. And what we found was that people did not necessarily adopt it so quickly. And what was the reason for that? It's trust. It comes down to it. It says, no, I'll wait for this to carry on for a little bit longer before I start making my real-time payment. I'm not going to trust that because I'm so used to doing my normal EFT. I'm used to my debit order. I'm used to all those things. And these are the very, very important points that I'd like to raise today. First off, payments are great. People are using more technology to implement, but they're also going back to the tried and trusted, not necessarily adopting the new stuff. So when we look at like TCRB coming in, we're looking at PayShop coming in, we ask about NamPay in Namibia, we look at ZamPay in Zambia, the adoption rates are quite interesting. And what we've found from a change management perspective is that people are not necessarily as easy to move as you think that they are. And ultimately, if you don't trust the system, and if you don't have that buy-in, and you don't create that organizational imperative, you won't find the right levels of adoption. So the question is also, is the employee or the customer more important? Because who's ultimately selling it? Who's ultimately servicing it? It's your employee, it's your bank employee, it's your FinTech employee, it's your agent that you referred to earlier. They need to have that level of trust. And that is where we really struggle. And where we're finding it is that there's just too much choice. So like, I'm going to give you a couple of examples just now, but I went to the garage the other day, and we're going to show you a video about that. But it was quite interesting. So if we look at how disruptive technology has come out of India, as a great example. This new technology is so different and fundamentally changing the way that we work. So let me give you a use case. In Namibia, we've just recently implemented the government-to-person payments there, and it was quite interesting because the technology in India that allows us to do this is quite fundamentally mind-boggling. That you can log onto your, let's just call it Bank X app, and you can move your whole entire bank account from one bank to another with seamless, frictionless implementation by yourself as a customer. Now, what does that mean for a fintech? Or what does that mean for a bank? Is that you are no longer in control of your customer. And you think that we are in control because we've got all of our KYCs and we've got all these fancy texts and everything that's there. The customer is ultimately now completely in control. They can move seamlessly from bank to bank, from fintech to fintech, with no friction. And what does that really, really mean is that the original thought pattern around trust and how we would keep our customer no longer exists. And when you look at it from a change management perspective, is that change management and sales need to work together. Because if your customer doesn't know, and your sales team doesn't know, and they're not actually sort of fitted for purpose, they're not really going to be able to do that. So we can open new wallets now seamlessly in most African countries without even any friction, like no problem. And you can compare directly on your interface. India was an interesting use case for this because they moved so quickly and rapidly because the regulator forced it. When they forced it, that happened in Brazil as well. Same concept in payments concept is that they are effectively able to just transact without moving. So you don't need to go in a branch. There's no such a thing anymore. Last time I was in a branch probably about 2-3 years ago. I can't remember when last was anybody in a bank branch. I don't think anyone has a hand up here. You don't even need it anymore. But now, just think about it from a frictionless payments, real-time service. And what real-time does is it fundamentally changes your thinking. So where you would normally have your salaries and debit orders and everything, the real-time market has changed the whole way that everybody interacts. It changes your settlements, it changes the way that customers interact with you, it changes fundamentally everything. And as we looked at PayShop, it's now moved into, I think, 50,000 Rand limit now that you are able to transact on PayShop. And if we look at the impact of that on just normal transactability between people, it's huge. And we're no longer dealing with 2-day clearing periods and worrying about, calling my bank or calling my fintech, whatever, because it all happens seamlessly. It changes everything. And what I'm trying to get through today to you is that we need to accept change management as a fundamental part of your fintech operation. If you don't have a fundamental way of thinking about change, of how people are changing, how seamlessly they're able to move things around, the likelihood of landing products effectively becomes a lot less. So here's the paradigm shift for everybody. The reason I'm here today is just to ask you a very, very difficult question. More innovation, does it mean better outcomes? Or does more innovation create more customer complexity? So there's probably a few product owners and scrum masters and things here, and risk managers. The question is always down to this. Have you thought about who you're competing with? Are you competing with yourself? Because ultimately that is really where the problem has become. From a change management perspective, the customer has too much choice. And with that choice, they now own that decision matrix. It's no longer something that's driven by a company. It comes down to what the person is really thinking of. And that is what we have seen in a global trend. And it's happening to Africa so fast. Like you blink your eyes and it happened. And I think that that's just really where I'm coming to for today. So let's think about this. Compliance and regulation brings in a different thing. I would like to go back to my previous point around treating the regulator a little different. The regulator is now trying to innovate. And when the regulator starts innovating, what does that do for your relative fintechs? And what does it do to the customer at the end of the day? How are we stretching that message from the regulator into our environments with those customers and with our staff? Because the regulator starts innovating and they start wanting to move forward, they can become a competitor. And that is what I've seen in a number of countries so far that I've been working across. So more options, trying to stay compliant, more cognitive, that is the kind of thing that we're all used to. But on the right is that we've got decision fatigue. And I'm going to show you a very simple example of it, but think about when you went to a garage the last time, like a sort of a shop in the garage. Now I'm going to go through that quickly now. I was quite astounded the other day that I arrived there and the person behind the till there had 5 different POS machines. Have you guys seen this before?
Yeah.
Like 5 different POS machines. And you sit there, doesn't know which one to use, and then you try to tap on this one, and it doesn't work, and then that one works, and then before you know it, you, as a fintech, have actually lost your business. If you think about it. And that's just one example. If you go into, I'm not going to say the name, but I'm going to do it anyways, Pick and Pay. You go into Pick and Pay, there are 50 different ways to pay. And let me ask you, I bet you always just choose one. Everybody in this room probably just picks the one. And you don't necessarily know because you're also decision fatigued. You've got too many options. There's too many things to think of. Now think about it as a staff member trying to service all of this. It becomes incredibly complicated because now you have the whole operational background, everything that you need to do, your compliance, your paperwork, all of that. And that is really what I'm referring to as the innovation paradox. Is that when you are offered that many choices, it becomes incredibly hard to just make one. So what do? You go back to what you know. And that's everyone. So if you look at this diagram as an example, in the old days, it's just, okay, transact with my bank, no problem. Now you have different stores of value, you could go and have loyalty. I mean, for those who are on F&B as an example, you will only go and fill up an engine. That is how you kind of make your decisions now. So when you're thinking about change management as a science and an actual practice of people, when you're offered that much choice, it becomes really hard to direct a person into the right direction. When you try to land a fintech product, you're effectively competing with yourself. And that is the actual innovation paradox. So when we look at this is a very, very simple example of it. But these are the 5 problems that we picked up working across the continent for the past 20 years. Is that the customers, they need to understand more now. So they've got so many things they have to learn. Employees, they have to support more. They've got lots of things that you need to do. Then your sales team have to then work across all these different things. Which one are they selling? So your product owner becomes a really important thing. But then operations will have to manage more settlements, more recons, more things that you have to do. And ultimately support, if something goes down, you have loads of things that you have to then consider. And this is what I call the innovation paradox. So, I've just explained this already. I maybe talked a little bit ahead of my slide there, but that really explains when you start looking at the whole life cycle. The customer, the merchant, referred to the agent earlier, there's lots of things that you now have to consider. But what about things like barrier to entry? So if you go on to any one of the banking apps at the moment, it was a great thing. I actually spoke to my mother about it, so I always like to sort of ask her, see what she's thinking. And it's quite an interesting concept. She logged into her banking app, and I asked her, how many of these little things do you actually use? She goes, no, I only use the pay button. Think about it. How many things do you actually use in your app? Just open your own apps and think about it. You don't really use it. Maybe you buy the lotto, maybe you pay a customer, or you get a statement. But these apps have got so many things on them that you are just spoiled for choice. So you end up doing nothing. And that is really the challenge. So I want to really just climb into, I've only got 2 minutes left here. The few things I want to leave behind here today is really 5 key points that I'd like to give you professional advice as a change manager that has been specific in this industry for a long time. And the first thing is trust. Trust was brought up earlier, it's been brought up a number of times, but you need to also consider yourself and think about it and go, why am I not trusting this system or that application? Just think about how long it took people to adopt real-time services unless it was regulatory driven. It's a trust thing. Education. How much are you investing from your fintech perspective to educate your teams, educate the customer, and drive forward a proper change management driven agenda so that people are able to transition with you. Financial literacy is a really big problem in Africa. There's a lot of people that are not really banked, or they don't necessarily have access to the correct technology to use all of these apps that you're using. So I'm leaving you with a couple of thoughts at the end here. Sorry, I went back. Sorry. Sales enablement is really, really big. If the sales and change management teams don't work together, you are likely to fail in the payments environment. They have to work together. They are not competing, but they are very important that they need to work together to do it. And I think the thing from a change management perspective as well, which is really important for today's paradox, is organizational readiness. The ability to take an organization with you is as important as the technology that you're selling. If you can't get everyone on the same page, the likelihood of success is almost zero. Because you will just be another sort of lock on an app in your banking system. And that's where you need to be a little bit concerned. So I'm going to move past this and go into this example. I don't know how to play the video from here though. Can you please trigger the video? This was my experience, and it's quite interesting because we just used a video for it, but think about every single retailer that you've gone to. This is your typical environment. You've got all these devices, all these choices. What is the person going to use? Are they going to use your device? Are they going to use your fintech? How are they going to do that? And that is the choice, the innovation paradox. If you've got so many options, how do you secure? And that is what change management comes down to, is really moving people along in the journey with you. So there we go. Oh, I managed to play. That's a typical example. I just used this one because it was pretty much my experience the other day. And it was quite funny because I wasn't sure which one to actually tap on. So I ended up just paying cash. I have to lie, I haven't drawn cash in about 3 years, so I don't really know. But this is really, my time is up. See, I've got a big red block here. I just want to ask one question, and this is what I would love to leave the forum with, is that we've been in 20 years in this environment, working across so many different companies and seeing such different changes, that I'd like to leave you with this thought, and maybe just take it away from you. It's not something that is going to make a difference right now, because the question is, if we keep outpacing people with innovation, are we actually making the environment smaller? Because everybody thinks the payment world is getting bigger, but if we keep on doing all these innovations and not working together on how that all happens, and all competing the whole time, how big is that customer base? That is all from me today. Thank you very much.
Really good. Great talk, good slides. Take people on the journey with you. Are you going to be around during lunchtime?
Unfortunately, I have to get back to work.
But yeah, fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.